Welcome, everybody, to You've Got Potential, a podcast dedicated to sharing and promoting undergraduate research. Today, we're here with Alan Fu, a CBN major. And Alan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. So first of all, thank you guys very much for having me. My name is Alan Fu. I'm currently a rising junior in the class of 2023 at Rutgers, New Brunswick. As Georgia stated before, I'm a CBN major, and I'm also a member of the CBN Society. And I think neuroscience is really one of my favorite things to talk about, and it's what I want to study for the rest of my life. One of the reasons that I was really interested in neuroscience to start with was because in high school, I used to do work with children who had disorders like autism, ADHD, and working with those children really inspired me to at least want to study these disorders and see kind of what we could do to make it so that learning was easier for them so that they could live happier and healthier lives. And because of that reason, I was really interested in psychiatry. One of the big issues in psychiatry is that there's a lot of side effects. Of course, we've touched on this a bit before, different medications, any sort of medications like SSRIs, antipsychotics, they all have some sort of side effects. But in particular, I believe that antipsychotics have a very poor side effect profile, and often that discourages our patients from using them. If we were able to develop treatments with more tolerable side effect profiles, treatments that, we were sure would not harm patients or would cause like very, very minimal harm, if any at all, then I think that would already be a huge step forward. Right now, the thing is, one of the big things in medicine is that, we're not supposed to do any harm, right? But there is some evidence showing that, there might be, I'm not saying that there might be some harmful effects of antipsychotics, and that those could potentially even be more harmful than the actual disease itself. And that's something that, I really dislike, that I hope to change. And I know many others feel the same way as well.
I think you told us in your application that you're also minoring in psychology. Is that another reason why you chose this career or academic path?
Yeah, exactly. For me, it's really about neuroscience and psychology. Just combining that is what I'm interested in. I'm really interested in essentially the biological basis of psychology, or essentially why we think how we think, why people can think differently from each other, and essentially how, to me, I know mental disorders can be very severe, and right now the treatments for them many times are often not very great. They can come with a lot of poor side effect profiles, and society has become a lot more accepting of mental health, but I think there's still some sort of stigma around it that really can't be avoided, just because some mental health disorders right now, they can't be solved. Even if you have it, sometimes it can be viewed as something that defines you. And something that I always dislike is when we call people with schizophrenia schizophrenics, because to me, it feels like that is defining them. And that disease is something that's a part of them and can never be taken away from them. And I don't like that, because, when someone has a cold, we don't describe them that way. It's something temporary. It's something that, everyone gets, and you can just get through and you'll be fine with it. And I wish that it was the same way with other disorders like schizophrenia.
You mentioned you were talking about how some treatments have some side effects that are maybe unintentional and not that great. Do you think that part of that has to do with maybe lack of mechanistic understanding in the field, and that's something that maybe you're interested in or you're working on?
Definitely. I completely agree that there's a lack of understanding about the mechanism of a lot of diseases. particularly my project, is really about understanding a potential mechanism by which like this one protein might be involved in schizophrenia. And the goal is that, of course, if we can understand the specific mechanisms behind these mental disorders, then we can come up with better treatments for them, and treatments that like are more effective, first of all, and more safe for our patients. A lot of the theories right now about schizophrenia, a lot of great work has been done that has demonstrated how schizophrenia and psychosis can develop, as well as other symptoms like depression, like negative symptoms that are very similar to depression. But of course, there's still a lot that hasn't been discovered. We still haven't, like antipsychotics, they aren't completely effective, and we don't have any sort of cure for, I want to say, like almost every single mental disorder. Because of that reason, I feel like I would say that we definitely need to improve our understanding of the mechanisms behind those disorders.
Do you want to start to introduce your project and how you got involved with it and all that?
Yeah, of course. So I want to start by saying I've had a few different projects in my past year, and I will get to how I arrived at this recent one. The one I'm currently working on is an extension of the work that we've done in the past, and it's the work that I'm doing right now is like part of the reason that I wanted to join the Firestein lab in the first place. So our lab has found that there is this one particular protein called NOS1AP. And what that stands for is nitric oxide synthase 1 adapter protein. It's a very complicated name, but essentially there's another protein called nitric oxide synthase 1. The name is sort of self-explanatory. It synthesizes a molecule known as nitric oxide, and NOS1AP is an adapter protein for that. So what it does is it links that molecule, nitric oxide synthase, with other target proteins. So what we found is that when we study the brains of patients with schizophrenia, we can see an increased amount of this protein, NOS1AP, inside a very specific part of the brain called the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. And it's not just from postmortem brains that we see changes in NOS1AP. Many genetic studies have also been done on NOS1AP, and we've found that it's been implicated in schizophrenia, in PTSD, and depression. And functional studies have also had some similar results. But the problem is we don't know exactly how NOS1AP works. So one of the most common theories about how NOS1AP is involved in schizophrenia is that it actually inhibits the signaling of nitric oxide synthase. But that result is all the way from a study in 1998. That was when NOS1AP was actually first discovered. And the problem with this theory, or this hypothesis rather, is that it ignores a lot of information that has recently come up. The name NOS1AP itself obviously is indicative of that. It's showing that NOS1AP is not supposed to be an inhibitor. The original discovery of NOS1AP, it was called something else. It was called capon, which essentially just means something that binds to the C-terminal of neuronal nitric oxide synthase. That's when they didn't really understand the function. But NOS1AP now we know is not supposed to be an inhibitor, or at least the studies that we have nowadays do not show that it inhibits nitric oxide synthase. So my goal is to clarify the discrepancy to see, is NOS1AP supposed to inhibit that signaling or not? And one way I can do this is by analyzing what proteins NOS1AP is in a complex with. Does NOS1AP actually have to move nitric oxide synthase away, or can it also exist in the same complex? So what I'm doing essentially is a type of experiment called a co-immunoprecipitation. I'm going to take antibodies for an NMDA receptor subunit called NR2B. I'm going to bind them to a type of bead called protein A agarose beads. And then I'm going to run cell lysates from a rat brain through those beads. And the goal is that, first of all, NMDA receptors, the NMDA receptor subunit should bind to the suitable antibody for NR2B. And when that subunit binds, then it should also bind every other protein that is attached to it. So my goal is to take all the proteins that I find complex together inside that sort of liquid. And then I'm going to see, okay, is NOS1AP present in that condition or not? If it is present, then it would provide evidence against the idea that NOS1AP acts by inhibiting nitric oxide signaling. And essentially, it would provide evidence for other ideas or other mechanisms of how NOS1AP might be implicated in schizophrenia.
What does nitric oxide itself have to do with the mechanism of schizophrenia?
Right. So nitric oxide is very closely related to the glutamatergic signaling pathway, right? So NMDA receptors are very closely related to nitric oxide synthase. And to sum it up, essentially, when an NMDA receptor, okay, so glutamate can activate an NMDA receptor, and those NMDA receptors, among other functions, they can activate neuronal nitric oxide synthase. So the synthesis, well, the activation of NOS and the synthesis of the molecule nitric oxide has been shown to be important in the downstream signaling that NMDA receptors are usually involved in. So many of the functions involved with glutamate or linked to glutamate are a direct result of the activity of nitric oxide synthase. So if you would inhibit this enzyme, then you would also be inhibiting glutamatergic signaling.
So it's nice to hear all these details about your work, but I kind of want to know how your experience has been with research with the recent epidemic. How has it been transitioning from, I assume you were doing work in person to then online, or the other way around, coming back from online to in person?
Yeah, unfortunately, I officially started working in the Firestein lab. Well, I was supposed to start last summer, or the summer of 2020. But unfortunately, that's when COVID hit, of course, and we all got kicked off campus. At that time, I recognized I was super lucky. I was super privileged just to be able to work online and even do research in the first place. But of course, it's not really the same as being there in person. When you're there in person, it's so much different. You're working in a completely different environment, of course. You have so many mentors and coworkers there who are willing to teach you, who you can learn from, and you can work together with for these experiments. It's definitely a lot more motivating to be there in person and to do research with an entire team rather than just kind of sitting at your computer in your own home, maybe looking up random articles or doing some data analysis. That stuff is definitely very important, but I very much enjoy the in-person work and the hands-on work of actually doing the experiment yourself.
So I know we kind of touched on it before, but I don't think we fully went in depth about how your journey with undergrad research started out. Could you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, of course. So I'm actually going to go back to high school for a bit, and because that's kind of where my interest in research started. So in high school, I went to a high school called Biotechnology High School. And this was a type of vocational school that was very much focused on research and producing students who would study in the life sciences and do research in the future. So I was already familiar with some of the techniques that we were using, like Western blotting, cell culture, micropipetting, a lot of basic stuff. But of course, these were things that many high school students did not have access to, and I was very privileged to have access to. And because I already had this kind of experience in research, I knew going into college that I wanted to keep on doing research and I wanted to continue studying this. So when I came to Rutgers and I wanted to find like research professors to work with, I spent a lot of time looking through the professors in my department, cell biology and neuroscience, and as well as other departments that were related to the fields I was interested in, like in Robert Wood Johnson Medical School, we have a cell biology and neuroscience department. They have a neuroscience and cell biology department. There's genetics, there's psychology. I looked through so many of the professors and their research. And of course, the professor that stood out the most to me was Dr. Farstein, because at the time, and I mean, I still am very interested, I was, and I still am very interested in schizophrenia. And of course, the Farstein lab is one of the only labs at Rutgers that has been focusing on schizophrenia. It has been studying the mechanism of how schizophrenia works. And it has been doing this for, I mean, at least 15 years now. Actually, probably around 16 now, I think. Because in 2005, that's when we did that initial study, which found that there was an increased amount of NOS1AP within the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex of patients with schizophrenia. So the Farstein lab really stood out to me. And that was just solidified because when I emailed them in, I think it was like January of 2020, probably, where I emailed them and I really wanted to work in their lab, but at the time the lab was full. So my only opportunity to get in was through the Arresti Summer Science Program. So that was when I kind of went all in. I really wanted to let them know that I was interested in their lab. And when I came in for an interview through that program, I made sure to kind of be able to talk with everyone in the lab, to look at the environment, to talk with them about their research and how they thought about their research, how they work together with others. Being there inside the Farstein lab, being able to speak with everyone really helped solidify my interest in the lab. And it made me sure that that was where I wanted to work. I was very lucky that I was able to get in. I was sort of unlucky. I mean, we were all sort of unlucky that COVID hit at that time. And, you know, I wasn't able to work at that point. But I would say that I was very interested in this kind of work from the start.
I'm getting like really excited because now some of our episodes are like overlapping concepts because we talked about alternative splicing and protein isoforms with our last interviewee. So I'm just like kind of like excited about the synthesis of all this.
Yeah.
And I also wanted to bring up something that you have in common with another one of our interviewees, which is being part of the CBN Society. And so we interviewed me and I think she was like our third interview or something. And she gave us a rundown of her research. And she was also talking about how being part of CVN Society impacted a large part of her undergrad career. So if you want to like give your perspective of like how that's helped you or influenced your love for neuroscience and whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, the CVN Society, I have to say, I'm very grateful that it exists. It's a great place to hang out with other people who are very similarly interested in neuroscience or cell biology. And it's also a great place to get career advice, of course. So I should describe a bit about what the CVN Society is. So usually, or how I describe it, it's an academic organization. It's focused on sharing research and resources to students who are studying cell biology and neuroscience. And it's a very casual club. Essentially, we meet, and many times we have journal clubs where one of our members, it can be either an e-board member or it can be a general member. They will be there and they will talk about some of the research that either they or someone else is doing, maybe some sort of research that they're very interested in. And what we do is we go over a paper together and we kind of just talk about, okay, what did they do within this experiment? Why is it interesting? How can it be related to research that we might do? Where can we go from here? And just being able to, kind of sit with others and talk about neuroscience is something that I enjoy a lot. And I think everyone in this club enjoys it a lot, even though, we're all kind of nerds. That's something that I think is very fun for us. This is a place for many students who are considering graduate school or some form of higher education, because it's very common, at least for our major, CBN, to pursue either a PhD or an MD. And we hold a lot of events that are centered around that, that are centered around, giving other students and our club members kind of more knowledge about how they can improve or get closer to their career goals from here, how they can get involved in research, how they can start applying to, graduate programs such as graduate school or med school, what kind of experiences might be most helpful to them. We provide a lot of advising, and we also organize like mentorship for them. I like it a lot because of that.
Alan, I am absolutely blown away by this interview. I feel like privileged to be here and hearing all of your absolutely insightful answers so far. I am just like, I keep thinking about every sentence, and then like the following one is something else to think about. And thank you really so much for all this enthusiasm and knowledge and awareness. I wish all aspiring doctors had the level of awareness about their field of interest like you did, and your wish to make the field better. It's too easy to just say, oh, I want to be a doctor, help people, but like just stick to what there is. You were actually just hoping and working towards making the field better. And that's just beautiful. Really, thank you so much for being like so passionate about what you do. I would like to ask one more question to you, which is, as someone that seems so passionate about both what you do and research specifically, what advice do you have for someone that maybe is starting to look into research, or alternatively is interested in doing work on mental health, schizophrenia maybe? What should they look into or work towards?
So first of all, thank you very much for your kind words. That really means a lot. And that question, do you have advice for future researchers or those who want to get involved in mental health work? I think for research, definitely, this is something that is not easy to do, but I would definitely say it's best if you can start as early as possible. Like, I know people who have started research, they started working in like an undergraduate lab when they were like 14. Of course, like that's exceptional. That is something that, not many people have the opportunity to do, but it's something that is really appreciated, because the earlier you start, first of all, the more skills you build up and the more dedication you show to research, the more passion you show about saying like about how research could be a part of your career, how research is important to you, and why you spend so much time doing this. Actually being able to start at an earlier point will really help you come up with better research proposals, will help you potentially win awards if you're interested in getting like different sorts of grants for your research in undergraduate or like graduate programs. And if you're already in college, if you can't, start like super early, because of course that's not something everyone can do, you should just start as early as you can. Even like right now, if you're interested in research, just start emailing professors, kind of look around to see what sorts of opportunities are open to me, how can I start getting experience? And you also want to find a really good mentor, I would say. I was lucky to have Dr. Firestein and many other graduate students who are extremely, extremely willing to like mentor other people. They're always willing to share what they already know with me. And that's something that I'm really grateful for. I'd say that if you ever have the chance to like go into a lab and to speak with some of the graduate students, you definitely want to get to know them. You want to get to know lab environments. You know, do they encourage learning? Do they make everyone like a slaves instead? And you know, obviously that's not something you want. You know, what is the community like? Because overall, what you want to have is a community that supports you and you know helps you learn, because this is something that's going to be important for your future career. Of course, I think you should also really put the time into research and engage with it. A common number that I've heard like some professors throw around is around like 15 hours a week of research, they say at least. A lot of professors like to see that because, first of all, it shows some commitment, and it also shows that, you know, also that amount of time is a sufficient amount of time where you can start learning things and not just come in for a bit, do a bit, and then just leave every single week. And just one last thing about research, of course, you should definitely enjoy it. I mean, research, if you want to do research, then of course you should enjoy it. And you should have an environment of people where a community, I want to say. And just something about like getting involved in mental health. There's so many things that you can do. You can help raise awareness for it. You can help be a volunteer at like a hotline or like crisis text line, for example. There are really so many options. I would definitely look into the like mental health organizations near you. And I think something that I do and something that has become very popular recently is crisis text line. Yes, we still need more volunteers, and especially during the nights, I think at Crisis Text Line, I'll explain a bit about what we do. So we essentially act as crisis counselors to texters. We're completely free. Texters can come in and we can talk with them about, you know, how they're feeling at the moment, what sort of problems they're going through, and we work with them to kind of come up with next steps. You know, where can they go from here? What can they do for themselves to make them feel better? You know, what kind of resources are in their area? We are there to work with them and to kind of help them get through this and feel better in the future.
Thank you so much for all the advice that you've given and for explaining your research and your work in such a clear and well-spoken manner. We are so thankful to hear about like your passion and the level of understanding that you have for not only your research, but also the conditions that patients experience, and especially with mental illnesses. And we just want to remind you that, and everyone in the audience, that you've got potential.